Alright guys, so in this video we're checking out the Eachine US65 Pro. There's another version, I think it's called the DE65 Pro. It has a different color scheme, but it's essentially the same whoop. And there's probably going to be different, I guess, country colors for this frame, probably available as the original series of, I think, the US65 Non-Pro that came out maybe a couple of years ago. Now, the frame of this one is definitely different. It's, even though it has the same water transfer scheme here, it's much more flexible and it's not coming off, and the frame is not nearly as brittle as the original US65 frame. You can see it's got these extra, the design is just much better. It's just got extra reinforcement. It's a bit on the thin side here in terms of the height of the duct or the prop guard, so, but it looks like it is keeping the prop out of the hitting anything. You have a, I think this is a 2S setup here, so you have 0802 14,000 kV motors, and obviously you have 2 battery leads here. We'll talk about that here in a second. It's a big deal. This is running the Crazy Bee X flight controller, which has the 401AC flight controller and video transmitter and receiver all in one board. I did a video on this a while back, and I think this is the first product that has this board in it that's running on 2S binding out of the box. This has the Cadex Ant Nano on here, and so it's not the light, it's the Nano, which has the 14mm mounting. And of course you can change your settings on here if you need to. The plug is still, well, it's hard to see, but you can see it's right there, and they do include the controller board to change your settings if you want. But the other plug, and it's not really coming out too well on the camera here, has been removed, and you can see here they've directly soldered the power, video, and ground wires to the back of the board there. That is a non-standard setup for the Ant Nano. Now this canopy also has the same water transfer color on here, but it's not as flexible as this, but it seems like it's going to be okay for most crashes. It seems like it's pretty tough. It doesn't seem like brittle like the US65 original canopy. We'll have to see how it holds up over time. Of course, it has taken a few crashes. As you can see, there's some scuff marks here on the top from crashing in the garage, but on concrete. But you know, it's not from super high height or going super fast either, so only time will tell. It doesn't look like there's any other damage as far as I can tell to the canopy or to the frame. Okay, so real quick, the rest of the stuff you get in the box, you do get spare props and prop removal tools, some spare screws. Those are for the motors, I believe, in case any of those fall out. And you get a Phillips head screwdriver, pretty standard. You get a charger, and you can charge via the 12-volt barrel plug, 2 to 6S LiPo on an XT60. Those are the two options. And then you can change your voltage here, 4.2 or 4.35, or your amperage, 0.2 or 0.6 amps on this switch here. And this is using either the PH2 connector or this new GNB27 connector here. So we'll talk about that more in a second. So they are providing a AC power brick here with the 12-volt barrel plug if you want to charge at home. But then if you're going to be charging in the field, you probably want to take like a 4S LiPo. That would what I would recommend, and with an XT60, and then you can charge up your batteries in the field with this. Of course, you do get the standard case here, but this one's a little bit bigger because the AC brick is right here, and that's why the case is a little bit bigger. And you get your standard Eachine manual, has all the setup, firmware, flashing, etc., etc. It's all in here. It's pretty well documented, and has good pictures. And last but not least, you get these Eachine branded 250 milliamp hour 1S high voltage LiPos. And you know, Eachine branded batteries aren't super hot, like 30 to 60C. You could probably get better batteries right there, but we'd have to wait for this new connector to come out and be more widely available. It's called the GNB27. I think these are the first ones that came out. It was very confusing on the website. I think the first 200 of these have this connector, and then they're going to switch it to something called ET200 or ET 2.0 or something like that. And I believe it's the same. So I think it's just that they're just changing the name, but the connector is the same. So the battery should be compatible, hopefully. We'll have to see. So, you know, the reason they went with this connector is, you know, it's under basically the same philosophy as like this BT 2.0 connector from Betaflight or from Beta FPV. And you have a very big solid pin there. It's much bigger than the one that's on the PH2 connector. And you can see here, it's pretty big. If you look at if you compare the pin size on the inside here, it's fairly comparable. It's hard to see because it's kind of black inside there, but the pin looks about the same. And the reason we want these bigger pins is so we can send more current from the battery into the flight controller and the ESCs, and you're gonna need that for things that, like, you know, require like a lot of extra current, hard maneuvers, quick turns, you know, recovering out of dives, that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit later in terms of like flight characteristics and what this will be good for. So at the time of the recording of this video, these batteries are only coming with this kit here. I'll add a link later as to where you can get more of these. Obviously, they're going to be Eachine branded. Hopefully, you know, GNB branded or whatever are going to be available later. I think that's kind of the problem with these newer batteries are coming with newer type connectors, like the Beta FPV one is like basically our other manufacturers going to adopt the new connector and let it, you know, basically make it into a standard so that more of these batteries will become available. And you haven't seen a whole lot of these. I think Tiny Whoop has this connector on one of their batteries. I think they're the only other manufacturer besides Beta FPV where you can get this connector. And you can buy the connectors separately and make your own batteries, which is definitely possible. But then that's kind of, you know, it's not super safe. Could be a little bit dangerous, and it's kind of tedious to, you know, put all these connectors on these little tiny batteries if you have a bunch of them, like say 10 or 20 of them, which typically for a whip you're going to have a lot of these. So that's kind of why this hasn't been widely adopted yet. And of course, this battery is mainly only available from Beta FPV, or you have to make your own battery. So that's kind of a problem. So you're going to have that sort of same issue here. Now the connectors, the batteries, and all that aren't even available yet. So if you do buy this, you're pretty much just stuck with these 4 batteries. Of course, if these batteries die, you can probably pick up some GNB 250s or some other brand and desolder the connector here. That shouldn't be that difficult to do, and then put that on the new battery. So it's not the end of the world. If you happen to kill these batteries, you need more. You can just pop this off and put them on new ones. But of course, that's something you'll have to do, and you'll have to be pretty good at soldering the wires on. So be aware of that issue. Now, to get these batteries in here in a 2S configuration, this frame is really meant for 1S. And so you have to basically put the battery in, or put one battery in. Then you need this little adapter that comes with the kit, and it goes like in here, and then you have to put the second battery through that, like so, and then it's held on like this. Now, I had the hardest time figuring out how to get this to work properly. It is flexible because it's made out of TPU, but it is really hard to get the batteries in here with this, so I just decided not to use it, and instead I just used a couple of rubber bands, and you can just put them on basically on this side and over here, and that'll hold the 2 batteries together. It'll hold the second battery to the first battery. That's what I did. Yeah, I may redesign this and make another one of a different size or shape, because this one is very hard to fit in here and hold 2 batteries. I think they need to redesign this one. This is not easy to get both batteries in with this particular part. Okay, so here's the weight. Now mine has the Crossfire receiver in it, so it's probably going to be a bit heavier than the one that has a built-in FreeSky receiver, so be aware of that. and I'm coming in here at about 24.2 grams, and then throw on 2 batteries. And now we're coming at 38.7 grams. So yeah, it is significantly heavier than the 1S typical setups here. So this is actually a US65 conversion where I broke the frame and I just turned it into a pusher with a Meteor 65 frame. I think I did a video a while back. I'll link it in the description if you're interested in checking it out. But you can see this one here only weighs 19.6 grams, and with a GNB 250 only flying out on 1S, it's 26.2 grams. Of course, it's a totally different power setup. So just again, 26.2 grams versus 38.7 grams. Yeah, it's like 12 grams heavier for this setup. So it flies completely differently from your typical 1S whoop. Okay, so let's talk about the flight characteristics. So basically, because it is significantly heavier and it's, we're basically running 2 batteries, and that's where most of the weight comes from, is you're going to need this better connector. If you're using like a PH 2.0 connector, you're probably not going to get as good of performance on the 2S setup. And when you're trying to come out of dives, when you're doing acro moves or try and make really hard, quick turns, if you're doing like a racing setup, then you're going to need this better connector to get better performance. Plus, in addition to allowing more current through it, is actually providing less resistance. So we have a little less voltage sag, and that helps in terms of performance. Also, it makes the battery, I guess, it basically gives you more juice out of the battery over the long run before it dies. So you get a longer flight time. So if you're flying this indoors, not flying too hard, you get roughly 3.5 minutes of flight time on the 2 batteries. But if you're doing like more hard acro outdoors, a lot of flippy floppies, and just pushing it more, you're going to get like 2.5 minutes on this setup on the two 1S lipos. So one thing to note, and you've probably seen this, I've probably put some video up already, is if you're running the Crossfire receiver version here, I highly recommend taking this stock antenna off and putting on like a shorter one, or just like one of these little monopoles. I did a video on this a while back, and you just need to, I think this is the active element's like 19 millimeters, and you're not going to get the same range, of course, but I mean, if you're flying for 3 minutes, 2.5, 3 minutes, how far away are you going to be able to get and come back? Not that far. So you're going to get plenty of range with something like this. It's going to have less weight, and you're going to probably avoid the video problem that I was getting with this setup here. I think it's probably due to this ground element here and being close to the VTX antenna. This is actually the VTX antenna here. So you get lines in the video, and it's intermittent, or it kind of comes and goes, but I was getting it quite often. I'm not sure if you're going to have that same problem with like the FreeSky versions. It's probably just limited to the Crossfire version. So something you should be aware of. You're probably going to want to switch the antenna out to something like this, maybe something even shorter, and just stick it out the back here. You're going to get plenty of range even on this little shorter antenna, no problem. You're not going to be able to fly that far, flying for 2.5 to 3 minutes anyway. So again, back on the performance discussion on this, I think, basically because it's heavier, it flies differently, and you have to sort of account for the extra weight, especially when you're trying to make turns, or if you're trying to come out of dives. That extra weight, that extra momentum, you're gonna need to get on the throttle a little bit sooner than you would normally think you would need to. And it's not something that it will be too terribly difficult to adjust to. I think it shouldn't be that hard, but you might find it quite different from your typical 1S whoop experience. It's going to fly more like a heavier quad, in my opinion, more towards like a 2-inch quad on 2S is kind of my opinion on that. So adjust your flying style to the extra weight. It's very different from a typical 1S whoop. Lastly, the tune on here, I think it's running Betaflight 357. I didn't really change anything. It's fine. I think a lot of stuff is that, especially in the whoop side, is still running 357 or older versions of Betaflight. just because it's, the tunes are more simple and they seem to run just fine. And you saw that in the flight, flight footage. It's you're not going to get that much of a difference in terms of going to Beta Flight 4.1 or 4.2 in terms of flight characteristics or differences in how it flies. In my opinion, it's going to fly pretty similarly, and 357 is just going to be easier to tune. So I would say, if if it comes to 357, which I think it will, just leave it with 357. You'll be fine with that. Anyway, so I guess we'll have to see what happens with this new battery and connector standard. I'm not sure how things are going to play out. Hopefully these connectors will be available to purchase separately, so you can add them to your own batteries and make additional batteries. That would be ideal, because right now, in terms of getting new batteries or replacement batteries, is a little bit up in the air. So, you may be a bit hesitant to get into a whole new connector here. Of course, you can just discard these batteries and connectors and just cut off this connector completely and put on whatever connector you have, like the PH 2.0 connector. Of course, the performance is going to be probably a lot different on the PH 2.0 connector versus this new GMB 27 connector. I think the performance is going to be less, but of course you can totally do that if you have a lot of batteries that you've already invested in and you want to continue to use those. You can totally do that, of course. Anyway, it's going to do it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.